Hello everybody, welcome to video number 5. I would call it pods. Before we go further, quick heads up. I'm splitting this topic into 2 parts. In part 1, we will focus on understanding pods, the foundation, the architecture, and the why behind everything in pods. In part 2, we will take a real pod YAML file and break it down line by line, field by field, so you not only understand the pods conceptually, but can also write them down with confidence. Why? Because if I try to cover everything in one video, it's going to get too long, and I don't want you losing focus halfway through. So let's get into it. If you have ever looked at Kubernetes and thought, this is just too much, I promise you, it's because nobody explained pods properly. Pods are the foundation. Get this wrong, and everything in Kubernetes feels confusing. Get this right, the whole thing clicks. So let's fix that right now. Let me start with something that you already understand. Imagine you run a pizza delivery business. A customer places an order. So what do? Do you send the pizza in one delivery, the sauce in another, and the seasoning in the third? Obviously not. You pack everything into one box. That box has the main item, that's your pizza, the supporting items, sausage, seasoning, and extras. Everything the customer needs together in one delivery. Now map that to Kubernetes. That pizza is your main container, which runs your application. Sauce and seasoning are your sidecar containers, such as helpers, logging agents, proxies. And the box itself, that's your pod. A pod is simply a wrapper that holds everything your application needs together. That's it. That's the whole concept. Now let's connect this to how Kubernetes actually works under the hood. Our goal is simple, run applications. But Kubernetes doesn't run applications directly. It works in layers. Applications run inside the container. Containers are placed inside the pods. And Kubernetes manages those pods. So when you think you are deploying an app, you are actually deploying a pod that contains the container containing the app. And this is why pod is called the smallest deployable unit in Kubernetes. Kubernetes cannot directly restart a container. It cannot scale a container, but it can restart a pod, replace a pod, and scale pods. Everything is built around this. High availability, you deploy multiple pods. Fault tolerance, replace the failed pods. Scaling, increase the number of pods. Load balancing, distribute traffic across the pods. Write this down if you need to. Everything in Kubernetes revolves around pods. Okay, this next part trips up almost every beginner, so pay close attention. Pods are ephemeral. Ephemeral means temporary, short-lived, not permanent. If a pod dies, Kubernetes does not fix it. It creates a brand new pod with a new IP address starting completely fresh. Think about the delivery box again. If a box gets damaged, you don't repair that box. You grab a new one. This is fundamentally different from how we used to run applications. In the traditional world, VMs or physical servers, when something crashes, you would SSH in, debug it, patch it, restart it. You would fix the thing that broke. Kubernetes flips that model completely. There is no fixing. There is no repairing. There is no SSH into the pod to figure out what's wrong. The pod is gone. A new one takes its place, and your application keeps running. This is what people mean when they say Kubernetes is self-healing. It doesn't fix broken things. It replaces them completely and automatically without you touching anything. And once that clicks, the whole design philosophy of Kubernetes starts to make sense. Now here's where this creates a problem. Every time Kubernetes creates a new pod, it gets a brand new IP address. Think about what that means in practice. Say you have a front-end application that talks to a backend pod. It knows the backend's IP. Let's say it's 10.0.0.5. Everything works fine. Now that backend pod crashes. Kubernetes does what it does, spins up a brand new pod, but this pod doesn't get the same IP back. it gets a completely different IP. Let's say 10.0.0.8. Your front end server, your front end, it's still trying to talk to 10.0.0.5. That IP is gone. Connection fails. Your application breaks. And this isn't a rare edge case. Pods get recreated all the time because of node failures, deployments, scaling events, resource pressures, etc. In real production environments, pods come and go constantly. So if your applications are talking directly to pod IPs, they are essentially talking to addresses that can disappear at any moment. That's not a system, that's chaos. That's exactly why we deploy services, such as cluster IP, node port, or load balancers. They sit in front of your pods. A service gets a stable, permanent IP that never changes. It doesn't matter how many times the pods behind the service gets recreated or what IP those new pods get, the service IP stays the same. So your front end talks to the service. The service figures out which pods are healthy and routes the traffic there. Pods die, new pods come up, services automatically discovers it and starts routing to it. Your application never notices anything happened. That's the problem services solve. We will go deeper into them in our upcoming videos. But for now, just keep in mind two things. Never rely on pod's IP addresses as it keeps changing every time a pod is recreated. Always design your system assuming pods can disappear anytime. This isn't a flaw. It's a feature. It's how Kubernetes stays resilient. Now, how do we create pods? There are two ways. And I'm going to use an example that will make this stick forever. Method 1 is imperative method. Think of it like booking an Uber and saying, take me to this destination right now. Direct instruction, immediate action. You are telling Kubernetes what exactly to do. Method number 2 is declarative approach. Think of it like this. The passenger tells the Uber driver, I want to reach this destination. Take the scenic route via the riverside. If that's blocked, use the bridge. Avoid highways. Keep the ride comfortable. Now here's the key difference. You don't keep giving instructions every minute. The system figures it out. It adjusts when the traffic hits. It reroutes when the road closes. Your job ends when you define the requirement. The system's job is to continue maintain that requirement. That's declarative in Kubernetes. So instead of saying, create a pod right now, you say, this is how my pod should always look. Keep it that way. And Kubernetes does exactly that. If you have ever used Kubernetes in real job, you already know the pain. Kubernetes lets you create things imperatively, but that doesn't mean you should. Let me show you exactly where it breaks and why everyone ends up switching to declarative. For that, I'm gonna log in into my control plane node. So I'm logged in into control plane as you see, and now I'm gonna run the command to create the pod imperatively. That's the command. Let me tell you what we did over here. As I said, kubectl is a way by which we talk to the cluster. So we are telling Kubernetes cluster to run a pod named mypod with the nginx image, and restart never means if in case the pod fails for any reason, don't restart it. Now that's the command which you use to run the pod imperatively. And boom, we see that the pod is created. The command to see the pods running on a system is this. We see that the pod is under creating container status. Let's monitor the pod. Okay, it's running. So what did we see? The pod is running super fast, no YAML. This feels great. The pod is up. Now what did we see? The pod came up and running instantaneously. Now here's the issue. Where is the configuration of this pod stored? Nowhere. It's not in Git. It's not a file. It's not there anywhere. This is the number one problem. In imperative workflow, the state lives in your terminal history as the command that you ran. Once a command is run, Kubernetes has the result, but your team has no record of how it was created. Now, what if somebody modifies it later on? There is no authoritative definition of this pod. Kubernetes has state, but humans have nothing to reference. Now imagine tomorrow your pod dies or you delete it. Can you create the pod exactly as it was before? Be honest. Would you remember the exact command? Let that sink in. You might remember the image, but the port, the flags, the versions, no. This is why problem number 2 exists. Imperative commands create a moment in time. They don't create a reproducible definition. Even worse, if a teammate runs a slightly different command, congratulations, you have a configuration drift. Now let's zoom out from you to a team's environment. How does this go through code review? What do reviewers look at? What exactly do they approve? You can't review a shell command that already has been executed. By the time the team sees it, it's already live. This is why enterprises don't trust imperative workflows. There is no approval gate, no audit trail, and no safe rollback. Now let's do the same thing declaratively. We will create a file by the name newpod.yaml, and that's the structure of the file. We have the API version, kind, metadata, and specs. We will go into detail about the structure of a YAML later in the same course. But I have a file which I'm going to use to create a pod. Let's take a look at how. So newpod.yaml is the file. I'm going to create a pod using that. kubectl command, kubectl create is the command. And boom, just like that, the pod is now created. Let's wait for the pod to get up and running. Oops, it failed to pull the image. Let's see what happened. The pod definition looks good. Okay. kubectl describe is the command by which you can see the logs inside the pods. So I see that as per the logs, the container got created and it was started. So I think that error, image pull error, was just a transient error. It was able to pull the image later on successfully. And now we see both of our pods are running. My pod was created imperatively and new pod was created declaratively. So I'm going to change the Nginx image over here to 1.24. When we say pull image Nginx, it will always pull up the latest Nginx image from the repository. Now, when I say pull Nginx image 1.24, it's going to look for that 1.24 Nginx image in the repository and explicitly pull only that. So that means I'm hard coding, or I'm pinning down the version of image of Nginx that I need. Now that change has taken effect. So what did we notice here? Now that we have the newpod.yaml file, that file is now the single source of truth. Not my terminal, not my memory. If someone asks what is running in production, you point them to that YAML file. That also solves the problem too. Tomorrow, next week, next year, whenever you will run the kubectl apply command for that newpod.yaml, the result will always be the same every time. This is not convenience, this is reliability. It also fixes the third problem that was with imperative approach, review and governance. You can have different versions of the YAML file as version 1, version 2, version 3. Version 1 in our case had no image version mentioned, but version 2, after the change, we explicitly pinned down the image version to 1.24. So we have a record of the changes that we have made. This is perfectly reviewable, this is auditable, and this is safe. Your team knows what changed, when it changed, and who approved it. So, imperative is fast but fragile. Declarative is slower upfront but scales safely with teams and time. So it's safe to say imperative creates things fast, but declarative manages them correctly over time. And that's why people working in production, They like the declarative approach to deploy pods. That's pods, the concept, completely covered. You now understand what a pod actually is, why Kubernetes is built around them, why they are ephemeral, why that's a real problem, and how services solve it. The difference between imperative and declarative approach to create pods, and why declarative wins in production. Now in the next video, we are going one level deeper. We are going to take this YAML file line by line, and I'm going to explain exactly what every field means, why it's there, and how to never get stuck writing Kubernetes YAML again. If this clicked for you, drop a comment below, like the video if it helped, and I'll see you in part 2.